أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ومن آياته أن خلق لكم من أنفسكم أزواجا لتسكنوا إليها وجعل بينكم مودة ورحمة إن في ذلك لآيات لقوم يتفكرون. And one of his signs is that he created for you spouses from amongst yourselves, so that you may find comfort in them. And he has placed between you compassion and mercy. Surely in this are signs for people who reflect. Thank you.
Thank you, Sister Zainab. MashaAllah. Okay, hello, welcome. My name is Amanda Noor. I will be your host or facilitator, MC, whatever you want to call it today. I am a member of ICF Sisters Committee. I'm a member of ICF Sisters Committee, also a part of the New Muslim Committee. And I was very happy when Sisters Committee asked me to be your host today. In case you haven't been in any of the other classes, I'm very talkative. And that's probably why I was invited. Okay, welcome to Islamic Center of Frisco. Luckily, we have very nice weather to be inside, which last week with the rain, I don't know how it worked. Thank you for coming out to this very important event. It is important to note in the beginning here that while we are Muslims and we are hosting this event, domestic violence is not exclusive to just the Muslim community. It is, unfortunately, in all communities, irrespective of faith and culture. We are here as members of Frisco and the North Dallas community. In effect, we are part of a relationship. And no relationship is perfect. That's just a fact of life. While arguing is a natural part of any type of communication, addressing relationship issues with your spouse and loved ones is the best way to tackle them and to figure out a solution quickly. You are here today because you want to know more about what Islam says on domestic violence. Maybe you are here because you want to help someone who has experienced domestic violence. Or maybe you have experienced it yourself and are a survivor of domestic violence. Whatever brought you here today, please remember to listen to all of our speakers with humility, openness, and being ready to grow in your religion and personal communication abilities. And as some Disney movie must have said, we are all in this together. So marhaban, welcome. As a quick overview of what to expect today, we have 5 amazing speakers at doing domestic violence from different angles. Each speaker will have 20 minutes to share their topic with us. Please save your questions for the end. There is a green basket with index cards and pins if you have a question you would like to submit for the Q&A later. You can just note the name of the speaker that it's directed to at the bottom to help us, know where to go. Okay, with all of that out of the way, let me introduce our first speaker today. Sister Mona Kafeel has dedicated her life and career to being a change maker. She currently serves as Executive Director of the Texas Muslim Women's Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to empowering women and their families through multifaceted programs. She is instrumental in creating domestic violence shelters that are trauma-informed and culturally specific. Her extensive work with the grassroots community has led her to serve on multiple advisory boards and assisted in the crafting of legislation pertained to intimate partner violence and to ensure that survivors' voices are included. She has only 20 minutes to summarize what she has been working on for 15 years. No pressure. But please, if you think of any questions to have, write them down, and in the Q&A later we can come back to them. Thank you. Okay, please join me in welcoming Sister Mona Kafeel.
Thank you, Sister Amanda. First of all, thank you to Sister Zainab, Sisters Committee. Thank you for your leadership, Brother Asfar. We would not be here if the leadership would not give us this opportunity. And then last but not least, everyone here, thank you so much, because this is not an easy topic. It is very hard. But the reason why we are here are the numbers. The numbers tell us that 1 in 4 women will go through intimate partner violence in their lives, and 1 in 7 male. So these numbers are real. If you probably know somebody, either they have spoken to you or they have not, but in your circle, you already have maybe a man or maybe a woman who's going through domestic violence. So you learning the ropes, you learning from law enforcement and our deen, I think it will better equip you how to take care of somebody that you know is going through it. And this is our purpose, this is my purpose here. Texas Muslim Women's Foundation has been around for 17 years. First disclaimer, we are not here to break families. Those families are already broken, where one spouse has power and control over the other. We are trying to save somebody who's been hit, whether emotionally or physically. So please remember, we're not here to break families. Even when a lot of women come to us, we give them options. They decide whether they want to leave or they still want to stay with the abuser. We never tell anyone what to do. So these are a few things that I want to make sure that everyone is clear when we provide our services. So TMWF provides shelter. What happens is that we have a hotline call. Our phone is available 24/7. Law enforcement can call us, anyone can pick up and call us 24/7. If the phone line is busy, it means that our staff is speaking to somebody else. It doesn't mean that we are not picking up the phone. So maybe an hour later, 2 hours later, try again. So when we receive a call, then what happens is that we try to see whether, is this an urgent situation? Do we need to call 911? Is that person safe or not? So we assess them. And keep in mind that person on the other end of the line, we do not reveal your name. The minute a phone call comes in, your name is converted into initials. So apart from that person, there is absolutely 100% confidentiality, because our community is small and we are so in fear of that person will find out. What if our organization has a volunteer who's related to the abuser? So just know that we are highly, highly confidential. When they assess, then we tell them, all right, do you need shelter? So we provide shelter. So our shelter is open 24/7. We have 2 shelters, and they are in confidential locations, so that it's an easy way for anyone who decides to leave the situation, so they are safe and their children are safe. Our organization has 17 plus languages spoken. So if that person doesn't speak English, or even if it is broken English, we have 17 languages. And if we don't have that language, we will provide it, so that we understand that people who are here, English may not be their first language. So we support them in different languages. When they come to the shelter, and again, another myth, shelter is not prison. When they come there, they are allowed to work. They are allowed to cook, take care of their kids. Kids go to school. The purpose is that the trauma that they have gone through, that we start tackling them. So then we start providing them with counselors. They may need attorney, so we provide them with attorney. So while these services are happening, we also provide them with a social worker, because every case is different. Some cases may stay in the shelter for 1 week because they know the system, they know the bank, they've driven, so the system is not new to them. But then we have people, they've never seen a bank, they've never driven. When some of the cases when they came from another country to this country, they were never even let out of their homes. So how do we help them? 3 months, 1 month is not enough. So we extend their stay to make sure that they are ready for the next step. The next step in that process is we have transitional housing apartments. So after a crisis is over, then we move them into an apartment. An apartment they can stay for 6 months or a year. Different cases again, different time. During that time, we make sure that they find jobs. Maybe they get enough counseling so their kids are okay. So we try to help them as much as we can. And then after transitional housing, we know that they can move into their own house, their own apartment, or whatever they choose. Everyone chooses different options. All we do is give them options. Now, keep in mind that a lot of times you must have heard, I deal with it every day, all right? Both the shelters, we have 35 beds between two shelters. I'll give you the number that we are always drowning. A lot of people say they don't get help. I'll give you why. From this year, from June 1st to August 1st, it's a 3-month, 4-month period. Keep in mind we have 35 beds. How many hotline calls we received? 400. So a lot of people, we don't have a choice. We refer them out. We constantly refer them out. And then they come back, well, we don't have the capacity. All right. So the issue is that TMWF or many other organizations, we can constantly intervene and have another shelter or another shelter. But the thing is, and that's why you're here, because we need to work on prevention. Why should it happen? This is not in any faith, not in Muslims, Christians, Jews, Buddhists, Hindus. Violence isn't in any faith. This is how the abuser uses the religion. None of the religions will say you can be violent towards the other person, but it's the misinterpretation. It is the abuser using it. And like Sister Amanda, I think she said it, that there is a difference of what is abuse and what is not abuse. I'll give you my personal example. I've been married 26 years. I fight with my husband every day. Every day. But then at the end of the fight, at the end of the week, am I afraid of him? No. Am I worried about what will happen? No. We fight, move on. We fight, move on. That is everyday bickering, and every relationship has that. I have it with my brothers, I have it with my sisters. But that does not mean that I'm scared. That does not mean that I worry what will happen next. When you start worrying about that over extended period of time, that is power and control. That is violence. All right? That's the difference. So you have to be aware. And again, it's not only women. Men do get abused. We feel that, well, no, men are strong. How can they get abused? No. We see it. We get calls. Men do get abused. So it's not a women's only issue. It is a power issue. It is a control issue. Anyone can do that. So keep that in mind. Other than that, we have our services. Our services are free of charge. And we don't charge anyone anything. When they come through our door, food, clothes, housing, everything. So also keep that in mind, that there is no money involved. One thing, and I will wrap it up, I don't know the time, that we can continue on intervention services, but unless we do prevention, and that's when I'm looking at young girls and young boys, that's where they stop. And I'm also looking at a lot of women, because women also have the power to stop. We are sisters. If we see our brothers, if we see our sons, and we don't handle them, we say, well, our sons can do whatever they want to. That is wrong. So women have power to stop this. So we as women, when we
मैं अभी
see,
आपको सारी चीजें वापस करता हूँ.
oops, a lot of other people talk.
आप बैठ जाए, मैं भी काम करके देता हूँ.
So the thing is, each one of us has the power to stop the violence that we see around us. I see that a lot of women are coming out for our shelter services because mother-in-law have been violent, not the husband, mother-in-law. Why? We have the power to stop. That's all I'm going to say. Women have power to stop. The young boys and girls have power to stop. And unless we stop at that level, people, organization like mine will continue to grow. But my dream is to be out of business and shut the door where we don't need shelters, where we don't need any housing and services. So that's my dream. My dream is not to continue to grow and provide services. So each one of you has that power. We have amazing guests. They will speak about faith. What does faith say? And what is, if there is violence happening, what does law enforcement say? We all work together. This is not a difference. It is one beast that law enforcement takes care from one side, agency like ours takes from another, and faith. So all of us are in it together, and you have the power to change it. Thank you.
Okay, sorry for the technical difficulties. We have some cross-contamination, I guess, if you want to call it, from the downstairs nikah ceremony, which, ironic if you would think about it, that Allah would allow a nikah ceremony at the same time as a domestic violence event, but they go hand in hand. Okay. Thank you, Sister Mona, for that wonderful speech. I think I learned a lot. Raise your hand here, please, if you learned one new thing from Sister Mona. There we go. Keep your hand raised if you learned 2 new things. If your hand is still raised, please talk to Mona after the event. Volunteer needs some help. Okay. Up next, we have 2 speakers from the law enforcement that serves Frisco Police Department's Family Violence Unit. The Frisco Police Department has been a great partner at ICF, and we appreciate their services in our community. Today, we are joined by Sargent Cory Kraft and Miss Rebecca Tontz, a victim advocate. I believe they're going up together, so that's fine. Whenever law enforcement is mentioned, it is perceived that it is all about consequences and something bad has already happened. On the contrary, Frisco Police Department is a partner in creating awareness about domestic violence, and our speakers are going to tell us about how domestic violence can be prevented, but also how our community is impacted and the resources available within the community if an incident does happen. Muslims emphasize a respect for the law of the land, and the Islamic tradition maintains law and order as a top priority in a functioning society. The Islamic scriptures are also regard justice as a supreme value. Informed by these teachings, Muslims generally look favorably upon law enforcement. Okay, Sergeant Cory Kraft is a U.S. Army veteran, and he holds a master's degree in criminal justice, and he has served with the Frisco Police Department's criminal investigator and detective for the crimes against children and the sexual assault and family violence units for the last 16 years. He is also a lead instructor of the Sexual Assault and Family Violence Investigators course statewide. Basically, he tells the other police officers what to do, how to do it, all that. Ms. Rebecca Tontz has spent the last 6 years as a victim advocate for the Frisco PD. A victim advocate provides direct services to victims of crimes in order to lessen the long and short-term trauma experienced due to their victimization. This actually reminds me of one of my favorite verses in the Quran, which I will read in English because Arabic is not my language yet. And then, Sheikh, you can do it in Arabic later. Stand up firmly for justice as a witness to God, even as against yourselves or your parents or your kin. and whether it be against the rich or the poor. That is Surah 4, verse 135. I don't know if anybody has seen the basket, but there is a green basket with index cards if anybody needs to write down questions or just make notes as you go. Okay. Please.
So one of the one of the biggest issues that we have as law enforcement is everybody thinks that when we get called, they're going to go to jail. We get called, you're going to jail. I see a lot of head nodding, kind of, yeah. That's a fear. And we understand that when we're working these cases because that's all the different charges that we can charge somebody with. Those are charges that we can arrest somebody with. But it doesn't mean that we're going to arrest, okay? So we get called about 130 to 140,000 calls a year as a police department as a whole. In the unit that I'm over, the domestic violence unit, we have to go there and make sure it's something more than words. So a lot of times words, yes, they're offensive. Yes, they're harmful to you and they hurt and your feelings are hurt. But we can't necessarily charge somebody with that and say that that's against the law. So when we're looking at the charges that we're going to do, it has to be something of like a push, a kick, a punch, a weapon used, and the one that's probably the offense that has the least amount of evidence is when they start grabbing the neck, making so they can't breathe. Those are like a real quick synopsis of the type of charges that we talk about. And the reason I start with that, if you can go to the next slide, please. Those are the offenses that we actually take a report for. So I said there's about 130,000 incidents that we get dispatched to a year. We only took 457 reports in 2018. So when we look at how many times we're actually taking a report in all of Frisco with every single age group, all the way from 10-year-olds to up in their 90s, calling us saying that they're having a problem with their husband, wife, son, daughter, mom, dad, uncle, cousin. We're only taking reports about 457 times in 2018. 2021 was 567. So in about a 4-year span, 18, 19, 20, 21, we didn't go up that much. Right now we're about 516 reports to date. I ran this report last night. We had 516 domestic violence reports last night. Very small number when we consider about 130,000 calls total a year. And so the biggest thing we have to do is get the community to understand just because we go to your house doesn't mean you're going to go to jail. Of those about 516 reports, only about 40% actually got arrested, 40 to 50%. So now you're down to about 200 and some arrests. Not much when we're talking about a 12-month window, about 20 a month roughly, 15, 20 a month. Most of those are going to be husband and wife. Most of them are to the point that there are injured people. By law, we have to do something to stop the violence. So if we know the violence is going on, we have to do something to kind of stop it. And one of the ways we do it is to make an arrest. It's not what we take pleasure in. It's not something we want to do, but we have to ensure that people are safe for the next day, 2 days, 2 weeks later. So Frisco's approach to it is we will come to your house. We will ask both parties what took place. This is where we do have some hurdles at times, is Frisco is very diverse. A lot of cultures, religions, beliefs. We do separate both parties, and sometimes this is not perceived real well. We will do everything we can to accommodate female-to-female conversations, but unfortunately we have some shifts that only have one female officer. So if that female officer is not there that night or not there, then unfortunately we do have to take a male to speak with the female. We do everything in our power to also have a female photograph a female when they're having to take photographs if we have to take photographs. I've been in that situation where I had to ask a female for a photograph, and she said, due to cultural beliefs, I'd rather you not take it. No problem. Let me go get a female for you. Okay, so we're going to do everything within our control to work around y'all's beliefs within y'all's preferences. But one thing we were kind of focused on today, or what we really wanted to kind of hone in on, is just because we get called there, we don't arrest, which is a big misconception. I live in the community. My kids play football. That's the first thing that comes out of someone's mouth when they find I'm a cop. Oh, if you go to my house, you're going to go to jail. And it doesn't matter who it is. I'm like, no, it's not what happens. The last slide had the numbers. So it is something that we're kind of working on. We have other stats to kind of show it after Rebecca talks real quick on how many incidents have taken place prior to us even getting involved.
And so I was going to talk a little bit about the prevalence of intimate partner violence, domestic violence, family violence. These are all different names for the same thing that's going on in the household. We do have the power and control wheel. So it's not, although the physical violence is what law enforcement has control over, right? But there's so much more that goes into that, whether it's the emotional violence or financial violence. And so this kind of talks about the different things that we see when we're looking at the whole picture. Some of the stats are pretty similar to what Mona had up earlier. A lifetime prevalence of 1 in 3 women in Texas will experience some form of intimate partner violence. This doesn't mean assault necessarily. It can be those other forms of abuse that we kind of just touched on. The age that is most at risk is going to be our youth. So the 16-year-olds, early 20s, that's where we see this starting a lot. And then, of course, we're just now starting to get studies back about what happened during the pandemic, what happened during the lockdown. A lot of our calls decreased. People weren't calling as often, but that doesn't mean the abuse stopped. It actually, from what we can tell, grew. I think that y'all probably saw similar things. The reporting went down. I've seen studies as high as a 20% increase. This one says 8%, but I've seen them a lot higher. Go to the next slide, please.
So when we started talking about the 450 to 500 calls, what that's not taking consideration is before we get that first phone call, based on studies, most victims have been abused 6 to 8 times prior to that first call. So typically when we're getting called there's been multiple incidents of abuse before our first call. And that's across the board. That's across the country, what the statistics are showing. So what Frisco PD has done is we have a special position just to kind of combat the high numbers of individuals being assaulted and knowing that they're assaulted multiple times before they actually call us. And what it is the high lethality detective. What that detective does is we kind of screen each incident that we have and what are the chances that person gets assaulted again. And if they are they going to be seriously injured or killed? Because those are going to put red flags in it that we need to move a little bit quicker. So what we do is we move really, really quick on those cases, and we're going to be making phone calls that next morning. So call comes out tonight. Tomorrow morning, detective is going to be reaching out and investigating it right away. I can speak from behalf when I was on that grant prior to promoting. I worked with your organization, I don't know how many times within this community. So a lot of times knowing if the family had cultural preferences, religious preferences, we try to use our friends and organizations depending on the ethnicity and religion to try to better suit them. And that's what that high lethality job is for, is to try to reach out to that community, the partnerships that we have within Junior League and others, because there's 30 organizations involved with there to meet the needs of the community. I've actually talked to her organization on training it because of the dynamics of the high lethality. The reason it becomes so important is as you look at that cycle of abuse, what happens with abuse, it doesn't just start with abuse. What it starts with, everybody starts and they're cordial. Everybody likes it. You kind of go, you meet the person first time, you're typically not going to go back if the first time you meet they start punching, slapping around. You're like, I don't want to be around you. You're kind of violent, right? It builds over time. And so what happens is they start living together, they start having a relationship, they start having a marriage, and everything is fine. But then there's stresses, kids, finances, society, politics, all starts creating like a tension in the family. That tension builds so much that whoever that abuser is snaps. That snap might be a push, that snap might be a punch, it might be a kick, it might be more, but then it happens. And that's when that assault typically takes place. After that assault, most individuals, even though there's that power and control that she was talking about, they still have a level of remorse. So they have that level of remorse, and before they really realize what's going on, they start apologizing. The victim a lot of times will take that apology and move with it and say, you know what, it's a one time, it never will happen again, it's fine, we'll move forward. Well, we know from that statistic, 6 to 8 times. So this happens 6 to 8 times before we were actually contacted. Once they accept the apology, then they go right back into what they call the honeymoon phase, which everything's cordial again until that tension starts building again. Whether it's the kids are getting in trouble at school, loss of job, finances are difficult. I mean, I don't know about y'all, but my food bill has gone through the roof in this last year. That's tension. So it's just all those little things just kind of add up, and then the abuser takes it out on the victim. And so then that's when we are notified. And so what Frisco has done is try to combat that the best we can, and somebody dedicated just for this statistic itself. Next slide, please.
And so a little bit about my unit, my division, victim assistance. We do have 3 advocates right now, full-time. We are on call, so if dispatch has a major case, a major incident that happens, somebody needs shelter, they can call us, the dispatcher can. So our priorities are safety, always first. We work with the victim to develop a safety plan based on their needs. So not us telling them what they need, but them telling us what they need. Them telling us what they will do and what they won't do, what are absolute no's. And we develop the plan from there. So every safety plan is different and catered to that individual person that we're working with. Our second priority is victim rights, letting the person that we're working with know what their rights are throughout the legal system, about protective orders, how those look like, and answering any questions and walking them through it every step of the way. And then the last thing that we do when we prioritize is making meaningful referrals and resources and providing those to the victim. So depending on what their preference is, are they comfortable in a certain community? Is that kind of the community referrals we need to reach out and find for them? We work with so many different groups, Chetna, Texas Muslims Women Foundation, Mosaic, Family Place, all of those referrals, and we try to make the most meaningful one for the person that we're working with. And then a little caveat, we will have people come in that just want to talk to us. They might not be ready to report anything to law enforcement yet. And that's okay. And for a lot of that, we do have confidentiality where we don't necessarily have to do a police report. We will tell the person we're speaking to up front, if you start talking about certain things, then we do have to make that report. So for instance, like child abuse, if they bring up child abuse that's going on in the house, we have to say, stop, that is something I have to report. We do not have privilege. That is what Ms. Mona has in her organization. It's a small difference, but it is a difference, an important one, but we do promote confidentiality, and that is something very important to us. We believe in prevention. That's what we're doing here today. Intimate partner violence can be prevented by promoting all of these healthy community relationships within the community and partnerships. We can decrease any family violence that's going on currently, but we can also prevent it with our future generations, and that's the goal. we can't do it alone. It definitely is that partnership with the Junior League, the Family Violence Coalition, reaching out to all of our allies and coordinating services. And so this is just a little bit about some of the groups that we work with. We are adding languages that are spoken at Frisco constantly, which is very exciting. And when there's a language that's not spoken, we call Mona. Mona or Mosaic, yeah, and they can help us out with that. There's 25 languages spoken between Mosaic and Texas Muslim Women Foundation, and we utilize that, definitely. And so this is just a little bit more information about where you can get help. The domestic violence hotline, if you're looking for more information, there's a couple of resources on there as well.
For now. I'm going to hold it. It's much more fun to hold the microphone. Okay.
Thank you. So 2 more points that I want to bring forward. One is that CPS. Lot of women or even men, they don't come forward because they fear what will happen. The myth of CPS is they're here to take our children away. It is not true. We work with CPS. The CPS system is so clogged. They really don't want more children in their system. So please, this is a myth that CPS is working to take your children away. No, they actually see whether the child is in danger or not. And the first preference is usually given to another family member. Maybe a grandmother can take or grandfather can take care of the children. So please know that a lot of times women will not come forward because of the fear that CPS will take their children. Underreporting happens because of that fear. So just wanted to make sure of that.
Not a problem. Yes. Great information. Thank you so much for Sargent Kraft and Ms. Tontz and Mona. Having a strong connection with the law enforcement community has been a great blessing for the Muslim community here. And I want to thank you from ICF and all Muslims for being a part of this event today and for sharing these wonderful tips. I do want this to be a little bit interactive with our audience, though. So I'm going to put 60 seconds on the clock, and I want you to turn to your neighbor, preferably somebody you did not come with, and share one bit of information you've learned so far. Nothing, you don't have to change names or anything if you don't want to, just, get to know the lady or gentleman sitting next. And then on top of that, I think finances are the main reason for divorce in the U.S. anyways. Okay. Anybody brave enough to share what their neighbor told them in confidentiality? No? No? Okay, don't worry. I can tell that everybody's interested and at least invested in finding a lasting solution to this problem. Speaking up for those who cannot speak for themselves is one of the most important tasks we as humans have in this society and certainly in the world. The Prophet ﷺ led by example and left us with a path of thought which reminds us his life was immersed in practicing and promoting social justice. He called out the traces of racism in his community. He put special effort into fulfilling particular needs of privacy and healthy living. He showed kindness to the trees and the animals. He helped liberate those shackled by debt and slavery. He amplified the voices of those who could not speak for themselves or who came from historically disadvantaged backgrounds, and so much more. Our next speaker will tell us about the importance of speaking up. Ustadha Rabbia Razzaque is an academic advisor and instructor at the Qalam Seminary School here in Dallas. The Qalam Seminary strives to develop Islamic thought and community leaders by means of education, practical training, and mentorship. Qalam aims to bridge the gap between the text and the context and living the tradition in a modern context. Please help me in welcoming Ustadha Rabbia Razzaque.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa salatu wa salam wa Rasulillah. It is an honor to be here. I'm so humbled to have the opportunity to come and benefit, especially from Sister Mona and our guests here from Frisco Law Enforcement. I just wanted to spend some time today talking about the more spiritual aspect of this crisis that a lot of our communities are facing. When you look at the Quran and the life of the Prophet ﷺ, which are the two main sources of guidance for Muslims, there's a particular theme that you see that's reoccurring through the Quran and through the compendium information that we have from the life of the Prophet ﷺ. And that reoccurring theme is that of mercy. There's a very beautiful narration that's mentioned in the collection of Bukhari and Muslim where the Prophet ﷺ teaches us that when Allah completed the creation, he wrote a particular phrase above his throne. Does anybody know what that phrase was? Very good. Inna rahmati sabaqat ghadabi. That my mercy will prevail. My mercy supersedes my anger. So you see that theme that we are being told that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that God has, okay? And then when you look at the life of the Prophet ﷺ, you see this theme over and over and over again in his mission, in his interactions with public, in the public sphere, and his interactions in the most private, intimate moments with those who are closest to him. You know, when we talk about character, it's very unfortunate that when it comes to being nice to people outside in the public sphere, it's very easy. You know, the worst abuser may hold a door open for a stranger, right? An abuser may be really good at talking the talk. They may have a lot of sweet words. They may say, please, thank you, right? They may be very, very good at their job. They may be bringing food to every week's potluck. It doesn't matter, right? But what happens behind closed doors is often where someone's true personality and true character shines through. And what's really profound about the character of the Prophet ﷺ is when you look at the layers deeper and deeper, when you go behind those closed doors and you hear the accounts from those who are closest to him, you see this thread of mercy there. Okay, the Prophet ﷺ's wife Aisha radiallahu anha, she says something very powerful. She says, "Ma ضرب رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم شيئا قط بيده." That I never saw the Prophet ﷺ hit anything. Never a woman, never a servant, never someone who, never anything in creation unless he was actively involved in combat or war. And so there's something so profound to learn from there. You know, when you look at these two main sources of guidance that we have religiously, Every page of the Quran, there's something that you can learn about mercy there. When you look at the life of the Prophet ﷺ, you're constantly learning about his character of mercy. But what's so twisted and what is so tragic is that, unfortunately, in our Muslim communities, we use these same sources of guidance as a means of propagating violence. It's very twisted, right? The Quran, which is described as rahmah, which is described as mercy, is often quoted by someone who's propagating violence. The life of the Prophet ﷺ, the narrations that we have from him, we use his words to propagate violence. It's very twisted. Like, if you think about that, it logically doesn't make sense. You know, I first had this dissonance when I was growing up, and one of my Quran teachers in our community, I used to go and study with her every single week. We would just do basic tajweed, you know. I mean, it took like a month to learn how to say Bismillah properly. I was like, man, I don't know what I got myself into, you know. But that's just the nature of the science of tajweed. And I remember, you know, after kind of spending some time with her, after a couple of months, she opened up to me about something that she was dealing with. One day she came late. And at that point, she kind of explained, you know, why she was late. Unfortunately, she had an abusive spouse who confined her to the house. And so she was completely dependent on when he would leave. She wasn't even allowed to go to our backyard. And I remember when I heard that, it baffled me. I was like, but wait, your husband comes all the time to the masjid. Like, I was so confused. Like, in my ignorance, it didn't make sense. I was like, you've studied the Quran. Your husband comes to the masjid like 5 times a day. What do you mean? Like, I was like, is this a joke or something? Like, I could not wrap my head around it. But that's the unfortunate reality of this, that it's not supposed to make sense. Someone justifying the religion to propagate violence and abuse, it logically doesn't make sense. And it spiritually doesn't make sense. It creates a type of very uncomfortable dissonance. And when you experience that, that's a glimmer that this is wrong. So that's the first thing that I want us to remember, that when it comes to the religious sources, they're very clear. They're very, very clear on this issue. But it's the way we as human beings, in our imperfect nature, the way we misuse them is really where the tragedy is. Specifically today, I want to talk about something that every single one of us, regardless of what we've gone through, a role that we can take into ending this crisis, okay? And that's the idea of how we can break the silence. We know what our religious sources say on this, okay? But when it comes to why, despite that, are we still so silent on this issue? Why do we still keep brushing it under the rug? Despite us knowing how the Prophet ﷺ was, why are we still just very awkward about it? Why do we still feel afraid when either we are going through it or we know somebody close to us who are going through it? Why is it so hard to pick up the phone and call the cops? Why is it so hard to go and share this with someone? Okay, and I want to talk about a few reasons. The first reason that I want to touch on is this idea of the victim experiencing self-blame. And I've met almost every single person that I've met in my short time of working in the community who's going through abuse within this sphere of people who are practicing or maybe coming to the masjid, is they go through this phase of blaming themselves. Okay, so like the officer mentioned, the abuse kind of happens in stages, right? There's that tension, the first incident happens, then the honeymoon phase of apologizing, the abuser apologizes, makes promises to get better, then it goes right back, okay? But one thing that happens during those cycles is like this confusion and this self-blame. Like, did I do something wrong? I recently heard this from a sister I was speaking to. She's like, I don't know, sometimes like when my spouse speaks to me, I feel like my reality is just becoming misconstrued. Like what I'm experiencing from his mouth, it seems completely opposite. You know, she's made to question her own self, or he's made to question their own self. And part of why that happens is because the nature of spousal abuse is so painful, and not just painful, there's a level of betrayal there, right? Because as Sister Amanda mentioned the verse at the very beginning, the whole objective of marriage, the whole objective of having a spouse, one of the things that Allah mentions is for you to find peace and comfort in them. And your home is supposed to be a place that at the end of the day, despite all the storms outside, you walk in through the door and you're supposed to feel like the sigh of relief. Like I'm home. This is my safe space. This is a place where I know there's peace in, right? But when that same safe space becomes a place of fear, when that same place becomes a place where you're not sure, like at what state you're going to go to bed that night, it creates a lot of confusion. Like you almost have to work through all these emotions. There's confusion, you blame yourself, like am I doing something wrong? Did I do something to deserve this? Like could I have done something different? Like could I have ended the argument early? Could I have maybe stepped out to a different room early? Like there's this whole series of questions that take place because it's such a confusing situation. There's not just pain, but there's betrayal that you're having to parse out, right? But I want to tell you something very, very important. There is no fault or no mistake or nothing that you could do, that a human being can do, that justifies their life being put in jeopardy. I'm going to say that one more time. There's no fault or mistake that a person can do that justifies their life being put in jeopardy by their own spouse. No. So this idea of blaming yourself, like maybe I could have done something differently, a person being physically abused, you have to end that cycle. You have to end that cycle in your mind of constantly blaming yourself. Because somebody putting their hands on another person, somebody threatening the life of another human being, it's not justified. You cannot justify it, okay? So it may be natural to go through that motion of questioning yourself and blaming yourself, but at some point you have to put those thoughts to a pause. Of course, it's natural to experience that, but at some point, you have to draw the line. That here, okay, enough. Enough self-pity, enough self-blame. How can I take this place of pain and betrayal and actively seek help? Okay, which leads me to my second point. Unfortunately, in our communities, there's this very misconstrued idea of patience. And there's this very unfortunate rhetoric that, okay, in order to save your marriage, you have to endure. You have to be patient. Allah says in the Quran, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu isbiru. You have to be patient through life's rough times. Oh, it's just a season of life. Everybody goes through it. These types of phrases are criminal. These types of phrases are criminal. To say that someone has to stay patient when their life is in jeopardy is being part of that crime. It's unfortunate. We have to put a stop to that. Because patience, as depicted in the Quran, is not to be passive when you're being mistreated. It's not to be passive when someone's abusing you, okay? And yes, in the Quran, Allah talks a lot about how difficult this life is, Allah says that, أَمْ حَسِبْتُمْ أَن تَدْخُلُوا الْجَنَّةَ وَلَمَّا يَأْتِكُمْ مَثَلُ الَّذِينَ خَلَوْا مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ. Do you think that you'll enter paradise without things coming your way that will really test you, just like they did to the people before? And Allah mentions some examples. The people before were afflicted with a lot of difficulties that shook them. But that's talking about normal life circumstances and normal life challenges, right? Someone gets into a car accident, someone gets afflicted with sickness, someone is in a war-torn country and has to be patient through that time when they have no control. So to use these same verses to tell somebody who's being abused that, oh, you have to apply this verse. Do you want to go to paradise? You have to be patient. That's wrong. That is misapplying the words of God to allow that violence to perpetuate, and that's criminal. So we have to get rid of this type of rhetoric that if you want to save your marriage, you have to be patient through it. Everybody goes through it. That kind of stuff, we cannot say that any longer. It's very, very important. The Prophet ﷺ actually teaches us that being part of the silence or watching abuse happen in front of you and not saying anything is actually a sign of someone's lack of faith. And there's a very powerful narration that I'm sure many of us have heard of growing up, where the Prophet ﷺ says, "Man ra'a munkaran falyughayyirhu biyadihi." Whoever sees a wrong being done in front of them, try to change it. Try to actively, physically do something about it. Use your hands to stop it. If you're not able to use your hands to stop it, then what was the second thing the Prophet ﷺ said? Speak up against it. So if you can't actively, physically change the oppression from happening, at least speak up against it. And if you can't speak up against it, then to what? Then at least dislike that act in your heart. But what does the Prophet ﷺ say at the very end? That last thing is the weakest of faith. The idea of standing up to oppression is linked to a person's faith. So you have to understand that Islam is not a religion of just passively suffering. That's not what our religion says. That's not the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. It's actually the opposite. We're supposed to stand up for justice. We're supposed to stand up against oppression. And there's like this three-step process the Prophet ﷺ shows. Either physically standing up against it, verbally standing up against it, or at least in your heart hating that thing, but just know that's the weakest of faith. What would be better is to either do number one or two if you can. Okay, the third reason for why there's this unfortunate silence in our communities is because of this idea of protecting my children. Has anybody heard that before? That I have to stay in this marriage to protect my children. But you know, research shows that children who actually grow up in abusive homes are more likely to have mental health issues, are more likely to have physical health issues, a lot of digestive issues, maybe linked actually to mental health issues. And unfortunately, children who grow up in abusive homes also have a lot of difficulty with their own spirituality. Because growing up in a home where their parents are Muslim, but one parent is abusing the other, or vice versa, that same dissonance happens. But wait, at Sunday school, I was learning about, how the Prophet was so merciful. But then I come home and the door's closed and all of a sudden, my dad is beating my mom, or vice versa. It's very unfortunate. It creates like this dissonance in a child's mind. And one of the first things that you kind of learn once you become a parent, I recently became a parent, my daughter's almost a year tomorrow actually. And so, I'm amazed at how she picks up and absorbs everything that my husband and I do. It's actually scary. And having a child in this tech era, I had a conversation with my husband that we need to be really careful about, how much screens, we don't show her screens, but we also are trying to make an active effort of not using our screens around her, because now anytime she sees a screen, she's going like this, okay? Or she's trying to type on my laptop. I'm like, oh my goodness, she must have been learning, she's learning from somewhere. But you see that despite this child who's not even a year old yet, they're absorbing what's being modeled around them. So just imagine, this is a 1-year-old we're talking about. Imagine as children are growing up, entering their teenage years, and they're living in a home where violence is modeled for them. Just think about what impact that has on their psychology and what impact that has on their worldview. So actually staying in an abusive relationship is not protecting your children. It's very painful to accept that, but it's actually doing the opposite. There's so much research that shows that children who grow up in abusive households, either, unless they break the cycle, they will continue to perpetuate that abuse. And if anybody has experienced that, you may know how difficult it is to reverse the cycle. So many hours of therapy, and sometimes you don't even realize how growing up in an abusive household, what impact it has until you become married or start having your own children. And you realize your default is to resort back to what you saw growing up. It's very instinctive. So to protect your children is actually standing up against abuse. It's trying to make the home a safe space without your children seeing that all the time. And that leads me to my last point, because one of the things that people say when they hear this is, but okay, fine, okay, I have to stand up, I have to do something about the abuse, but what will happen to me? What will happen to me financially? Where will I go? Who will feed my children? Who will give shelter to my family? Leaving is not as easy as they speak. And I hear that. I cannot even imagine how painful it is to be in those shoes of knowing that I have to make a call soon, but I don't know what's going to happen. Am I going to be on the streets? Is my significant other going to be in jail? What's going to happen to my kids? There's all these questions. But I want you to remember something very powerful. In the chapter in the Quran that is titled At-Talaq, the chapter on divorce, Allah says something very, very powerful. as a means of comforting the one who is going through that situation, who is going through a potential separation, who is about to experience this massive